I didn't think a simple hunt for a cheap laptop would turn into one of the weirdest nights of my life. That's how it went anyway. I remember scrolling through listings while half lying across my friend's little futon, trying to ignore how the springs dug into my back. I just needed something that worked well enough to handle school stuff, because my old one basically cooked itself after I left it running all night. So when I saw this listing for a barely used laptop at a price that honestly looked too good, I didn't question it the way I should have. I was tired, bored, and sick of borrowing my brother's busted tablet that froze every time I tried opening more than one tab. The photo in the ad looked clean. The guy said he only used it for remote work, and the office was like 15 minutes from my bus stop. At the time, it felt like everything lined up, like I just had to show up and pick it up. The guy told me to meet him at his office after work hours because he'd be alone and able to hand it over without distractions. I didn't really think anything of that either. I figured people worked at weird times all the time, and honestly, I wasn't in the mood to ask extra questions. I just needed the laptop before school started back up so I could stop stressing every night. So I grabbed my jacket, stuffed some cash into my pocket, and headed out before I changed my mind. The office building was one of those mid-sized ones squeezed between a tax place and some dentist with a flickering sign. The kind of spot you wouldn't look at twice. I remember standing outside the main door for a second because the hallway lights inside kept flickering like a bad movie set. I wasn't scared really, just annoyed that it felt like I was stepping into something from a video game. The main door was unlocked though, so I went in and followed the number he gave me. The hallway smelled faintly like old carpet and something citrusy, like someone sprayed too much cleaner earlier. When I got to the office, the door was cracked open, and I read this little handwritten sign taped crookedly to the frame saying to come inside. The room itself didn't look that weird or anything. There was a desk with some monitors, piles of folders, a couple chairs, and a bunch of boxes stacked against the walls. It felt like any average workspace, only emptier. The guy stood up from behind one of the monitors when I walked in. He looked normal enough, kind of tired, but normal. He shook my hand and then closed the door behind me. I did notice he locked it, but he muttered something about building rules after hours, so I tried not to overthink it. He grabbed the laptop from the desk and set it in front of me. It looked almost brand new, and I felt way too relieved, like I finally hit some cosmic luck for once. He started telling me all about its specs and how he barely used it, acting like he just wanted to make sure I knew exactly what I was buying. I was fully ready to hand over the cash and bounce, but then he pulled out this thick packet of papers and set them down between us like it was totally normal. He called it a data use agreement, which made me think of those long legal things you skip over when installing apps, but this thing didn't look standard at all. The pages had these weirdly specific paragraphs about access permissions, shared data, and something about ongoing maintenance rights. I skimmed the first page, and something felt off, like he wanted way more access than anyone selling a laptop should ever want. The wording was all crammed together too, like he printed it quickly or written it himself. While I was flipping through it, he kept explaining how signing it would help him keep track of device performance, even after it changed hands. He said it like it was a routine thing and people did it all the time. I remember sitting there, pretending to look focused, while my brain slowly pieced together how messed up that sounded. He hovered a little too close the whole time, like he was watching for the second I decided to sign. It made it hard to think straight, like I needed space to breathe. I pointed out that I really didn't need extra maintenance or anything, and the laptop already looked fine. He brushed that off and said it was mandatory for any of his buyers. He had this calm tone, or the kind where you can tell there's no room for arguing. And even though he wasn't raising his voice or anything, I felt this heaviness in the air, like backing out wouldn't be simple. The weirdest part was how he kept saying he could help me set it up right now, that he could walk me through everything if I just signed first. He even moved the keyboard closer to me, like he was setting a trap without trying to hide it. That's when I noticed his phone on the desk facing us, like it had been recording the whole time. I don't know why, but seeing that thing angled straight at me made my stomach twist. I didn't want to make him suspicious, so I pretended to be super into the paperwork. I kept flipping through pages while thinking of a way to leave without making it obvious. My pulse was rushing in my ears, and every time he shifted even a little, I felt like he was about to grab my arm or block the exit. The lock clicking earlier kept replaying in my head. I told him I needed to call my brother to double check something about the payment. He didn't love that, I could tell, but he didn't stop me. I pulled out my phone and pretended to scroll while quietly turning on my screen recording because I figured if anything got weird, at least I'd have proof. I walked toward the corner of the office like I needed privacy, but really I was checking if the window was even an option. It was sealed shut. The only way out was through that locked door. When I said I'd need a little more time before signing anything, he stepped closer again and asked if I could just trust the process. I acted like I didn't hear him and kept my hand on my phone, ready to pretend I got some urgent call. Then I noticed the building lights flickering again through the door's little crack. It gave me just enough courage to say I actually needed to grab more cash from the ATM downstairs. I made my voice sound casual, like everything was fine, and told him I'd be right back. He hesitated long enough that I felt sweat under my jacket, but then he finally unlocked the door. I walked through without looking at him, just muttering something about being quick. The second he shut the door behind me, I didn't stop. I didn't even pretend to head for the ATM. I just walked fast down the hallway, then basically speed walked out the front entrance. I didn't run because I didn't want to attract attention, but my legs felt like they were moving on their own. Once I reached the main road, I finally looked back. The office windows were dark, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary from the outside. I stood there catching my breath, realizing that if I hadn't made up a reason to leave, I might have ended up signing something that gave a total stranger access to everything in my life. And I still don't know what he actually wanted from all that. Maybe he collected people's info. Maybe he had some strange hobby or some messed up project he didn't want to explain. All I know is I didn't go back. I blocked his number, deleted the original listing, and checked for cameras outside my place for days afterward, just to reassure myself he didn't try to follow me home. Nothing happened after that, but the idea of how close I came to handing over my whole digital life still hits me sometimes. One cheap laptop nearly turned into a whole mess I definitely wasn't ready for. I'm not really the type who tells long stories, but this one still hangs around in the back of my head, so I guess it's worth laying out. The whole thing started on a day that already felt thrown together. I'd slept through my alarm, sprinted around my room looking for the hoodie I swore I left on my chair, and ended up missing the bus. Normally I'd just walk, but the weather was this weird mix of heavy air and that sticky heat that sneaks up out of nowhere. I didn't feel like dragging myself across town, so I opened Craigslist and looked for someone offering cheap rides, something I'd done a few times before when buses ran late. I know that sounds sketchy, but honestly had worked fine in the past. I figured it would be quick, easy, and way better than walking in the heat. The listing I found looked plain, almost boring. No flashy emojis or weird descriptions, just a short note saying the guy drove around my area every afternoon and charged $5 to drop people anywhere in town. The price was good, and since he had a couple old reviews talking about how he was always on time, I went for it. He messaged back fast and told me he could pick me up outside this little sandwich shop near my street. It didn't set off any alarms in my head or anything. The only thing I cared about was getting where I needed to be without melting into the sidewalk. While I waited outside the shop, I tried to cool off by standing under the tiny bit of shade the awning gave. Cars kept passing, and every time one slowed down, I kept wondering if it was him. After a few minutes, the small silver sedan rolled up. It wasn't the kind of car you instantly trust, but it wasn't the type you avoid either. Just one of those cars that looks like it's been around for years but still runs. He waved me in without saying anything, and I climbed into the passenger seat, mostly grateful for the air from the vents. I remember thinking the inside of the car looked weirdly clean. Not spotless, just organized to the point where it felt planned. No trash, no empty bottles, everything tucked away. It gave me the idea that he paid attention to every detail, which didn't seem bad at the time. I gave him the address I needed to get to, and he nodded like he already knew the place. Everything felt normal up to that point, almost boring, honestly, which is probably why what came next hit me so hard. We pulled onto the main road, and as the car settled into a steady speed, he started talking about how he'd been doing rides for years. Not the casual kind either. He talked about it like it was some kind of personal project. He said he'd been collecting recordings of his passengers to help him improve the service. I thought he meant audio notes or something harmless until he mentioned he had a folder on his phone labeled with names and dates. He didn't say it like it was private or weird. He acted like it was normal. That's what made it unsettling, the casual tone. At first, I just stared out the window, pretending I didn't care, but inside I felt this slow discomfort building up. The way he talked wasn't loud or aggressive. He just acted so comfortable with the idea of recording people without telling them. He explained how the recordings helped him understand things like tone, reactions, and behavior. He used the word behavior a few times, and every time he said it, it made the whole thing feel even stranger, like he was studying people instead of driving them. I figured he was exaggerating or making it up to sound important. Lots of people hype up their own hobbies. But then he tapped his phone mounted near the steering wheel. The screen lit up for a second, and sure enough, there was this folder icon with a name that instantly caught my eye. It was my name, not spelled wrong, not shortened, the exact way I spelled it in my message. Underneath, it was a timestamp from earlier that day. My chest tightened a bit, and suddenly I became extremely aware of how small the car was and how far we still had to go. I didn't want to react too strongly because I didn't know if that would make things worse. So I stayed quiet. I kept staring straight ahead, pretending like nothing about this was strange. The air felt heavier, though, like the whole atmosphere changed once I saw that folder. I couldn't stop thinking about what he already had recorded. Our text messages. Our quick talk before I got in. Something else. I didn't want to guess. He kept talking, moving from one topic to another like he was giving me a rundown of his own personal research project. He kept saying how people reveal the most when they don't know they're being watched. That line stuck with me. It felt like he was trying to hint at something, or maybe he just liked saying it. I couldn't tell. I glanced at the phone again, trying not to make it obvious. The recording icon wasn't flashing or anything, but that didn't make me feel better. I didn't know if he hid it behind some background app or something else. We hit a red light, and the car idled quietly. The moment we stopped moving, the silence felt sharp. I could hear the faint clicking of the turn signal. The guy adjusted his seat, then glanced at me like he was checking for a reaction. I stayed neutral, almost emotionless. The last thing I wanted was for him to think I cared too much. I didn't know what he'd do with someone who pushed back. When the light turned green, he started talking about how evaluations of people were important to him. He mentioned how he liked predicting their decisions based on how they sat, how they talked, how they reacted to sudden changes. He made it sound like I was part of some test I didn't sign up for. Every time he said something, I felt my shoulders tense a little more. I didn't want him to notice, so I kept my breaths even and slow. As we got closer to my stop, I started watching the buildings, trying to figure out the exact moment to tell them where to pull over. I didn't want him to know where I lived, so I gave him the address of a store a few blocks away. He didn't question it. He just nodded and kept driving, but I could tell he was thinking about something. His fingers tapped lightly on the steering wheel like he was working through a puzzle. When he finally pulled up to the store, I unbuckled before the car had even stopped. I kept my voice steady when I thanked him and said I'd walk the rest of the way. He nodded again, but this time his expression changed just slightly. Not angry, not confused, just thoughtful in a way that made me want to get out even faster. I opened the door and stepped out. When I shut it, I expected him to drive away immediately, but he didn't. He stayed there with the engine running. I didn't look back. I just walked toward the entrance of the store, pretending like I needed to go inside. Once the automatic doors opened, I slipped behind one of the shelves and peeked outside. He finally drove off, but not in the direction I expected. He turned into the side street that headed toward the neighborhood where I live. That detail stayed with me, sitting heavy in my stomach. He didn't know where I live. At least I hoped he didn't. But the way he turned scared me enough that I waited inside the store for almost 20 minutes before walking home. That night, I kept replaying everything in my mind, the folder with my name, the way he talked like he studied people, the idea that he'd been recording who knows how many riders. I kept thinking about where those recordings ended up. If anyone else had access to them, if he stored them somewhere online, if he was building some huge library of random people he picked up. I ended up deleting the app I used for messages, blocking his number, and adding a lock screen code to my phone that I'd never used before. I kept checking outside my window for the next few days, even though I tried telling myself it was pointless. Nothing happened. He didn't show up. But that didn't erase the feeling that he still had recordings of me somewhere, filed away with a date and time. I guess that's the part that sticks with me the most. I'll never know what he did with them, or if he ever went through them again. It's just something I have to accept. $5 seemed like a good deal at the time, but looking back, it cost a lot more than that. I'm not the kind of person who usually buys stuff from random listings, but this whole thing started on a day when I was bored out of my mind. I'd already scrolled through every app on my phone twice. I'd read every message I'd been avoiding, and I couldn't even focus on reading anything because my brain felt like static. So out of nowhere, I decided I needed a hobby. Not a serious one or anything, just something to keep my hands busy so I didn't spend another afternoon staring at the ceiling thinking about how nothing ever changes around here. That's how I ended up browsing through Craigslist like someone digging through a garage sale. I kept clicking through random categories until I landed on cameras. There was this old vintage looking one that caught my eye. It looked cool in a retro way, like the type you'd see in those old photos where people look weirdly calm, even though everything back then seemed chaotic. The handset it still worked, came with an SD card, and cost $40. For some reason, that was enough to make me message the seller. He messaged back pretty quick, which I didn't expect. He told me he'd meet me at this diner near the edge of town, the kind that has one of those neon signs that only half lights up. It wasn't far from where I live, maybe a 15-minute walk. I didn't think twice about it. I didn't even get dressed properly. Just threw on a hoodie and shoes and headed out without really thinking about anything other than getting something new to distract me. The diner parking lot was almost empty when I got there. The sun was lowering, giving everything that orange look that makes even boring places seem dramatic. The seller was leaning against an old truck, scrolling through his phone. He looked way normal. Just a regular guy with messy hair and a jacket that looked too big for him. He nodded at me in this quick way, handed me the camera, and told me it still had all its files on it. That wording stuck in my head later, but right then I didn't register it. I handed him the cash, said thanks, and walked back home with the camera swinging from its strap against my leg. I felt weirdly proud of myself for actually doing something for once, even if it was something small. When I got back to my room, I sat on my bed, turned on my lamp, and started messing with the camera like some kid with a new toy. I liked the way of it. It felt solid, old but not broken. I flipped through some buttons, trying to figure out what did what because these older cameras don't have the easy menus newer ones do. Eventually, I opened the SD card folder, and that's where everything shifted. I expected random shots of trees or blurry photos someone took by accident before selling it. But instead, the card had a ton of pictures. Way more than I thought it would hold. They were organized weirdly, not by date but by these numbers that didn't seem to match anything. The first photo I opened was of a living room. Or, well, someone's living room. I didn't know the place, but it looked lived in. Cushions on the couch a little crooked, a water glass on the coffee table, some jacket hanging on the back of a chair. The lighting looked like early morning, and it felt like the kind of photo someone would take if they were documenting something for an insurance claim. Except I didn't see any damage. I figured the seller probably took it and forgot to clear the card. When I clicked the next one, things started feeling wrong. The second picture was of a woman. She was sitting on the couch, but not posing. She wasn't even looking at the camera. She looked like she just sat down to rest, her face turned slightly away, eyes half tired like she'd just finished a long day. The angle was low, like the camera was set on something or held near someone's stomach level. I felt this slow discomfort crawling up the back of my neck. I clicked the next photo, then the next, then the next. Every picture was of someone inside their home. People eating, people folding laundry, people watching TV, people picking up something off the floor, people sitting on the edge of their bed tying their shoes. Normal moments. But they never looked at the camera. Not once. These weren't selfies. These weren't staged. These were pictures taken when the people had no idea a camera was pointed at them. I leaned back on my bed, the camera resting in my lap, trying to understand what exactly I was looking at. I kept clicking through the folders, hoping maybe there was an explanation hidden somewhere. But the more I looked, the worse it got. Some were taken through windows from outside, some through slightly open doorways, one through the crack of curtains. There were even a couple where the reflection in a mirror showed someone holding the camera, but the person was too blurry to make out. Just a tall shape with a camera held at chest level, capturing someone in the background brushing their hair. I started feeling like maybe I shouldn't even be looking at these, like I had stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. But I couldn't stop. I wanted to know how many there were. I wanted to know if the people were all connected somehow. I wanted to understand what kind of person just collected pictures like these. There were dozens of people, different houses, different rooms, all unaware. At some point I realized I had been reading the files for almost an hour. Outside my window, the sky had gone from orange to purple without me noticing. I rubbed my eyes and stood up. trying to shake off the uneasiness hanging on me. I kept glancing at the camera on my bed like it was something alive. I told myself it wasn't my problem. People sell weird stuff all the time. Maybe the guy didn't know what was on the card. Maybe someone else had owned it before him. But that excuse didn't stay convincing for long. The seller told me it still had all its files on it. He didn't say photos. He said files, like he knew what was there. Like the camera wasn't the thing he was selling. It was the photos, the moments, the people. I thought about deleting them. But then I wondered if that would somehow make things worse. What if the seller came looking for the card? What if he had backups? What if he expected me to keep the pictures? Why would he get me to buy it? Why sell it at all? My brain kept spinning in circles. I finally decided I'd box the camera up and keep it tucked away. I didn't want it sitting out in the open. I didn't want it where I could see it. I wrapped the camera in an old hoodie and shoved it into the back of my closet behind a stack of random stuff I had forgotten I owned. But even after closing the closet door, I still felt like there were eyes in the room that weren't mine. That night, I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept thinking about the photos of people brushing their hair or sitting in bed or fixing something in the kitchen. All those quiet moments that felt too close and too personal. Moments no one should ever take from someone else. The next morning, I checked the closet again, half expecting the box to be moved, even though I knew that wasn't possible. It was still there, but that didn't make me feel any better. I haven't touched the camera since. I haven't opened the files again. I've thought about throwing the whole thing in the trash, but then I imagined someone finding it and going through the photos the same way I did. I imagined the wrong person getting hold of it, and then I imagined the seller remembering he handed that card to me. So now the box just stays there in the darkest part of my closet, where I pretend it can't see anything.
Hey guys, really sorry to interrupt. If you're still listening, then you're enjoying the story so far. And if you are enjoying, then please hit that like button. That's all I ask of you. Thanks so much. Now back to the stories.
I wasn't planning on moving out at all when this whole thing happened. I was mostly just messing around online while half sprawled on my cousin's couch, scrolling through listings the same way people scroll through food menus they're not ordering from. I'd been crashing at his place for a while, not because we argued at home or anything dramatic like that, but because sometimes it just felt easier to sleep in the living room than deal with the noise back where I live. I didn't have the money for my own place, not even close, but I still looked. It made me feel like I had options, even if I didn't. That's when I found the ad for the room. It wasn't flashy or suspicious looking. In fact, it looked more legit than most of the stuff I usually saw. The listing said a couple rented out rooms in their house to people who needed a chill place to stay, which sounded better than the usual tiny rooms that looked like someone tried to convert a broom closet. The pictures showed a pretty normal bedroom, not huge but not tiny either, and the price was $450 a month, which honestly sounded like some miracle. I figured even if I wasn't ready to move, I could at least check the place out. It felt harmless. The couple responded quickly. They said they wanted to do a compatibility interview, which sounded weird but kind of harmless. I didn't want to seem desperate, so I acted casual and said I could come by the next afternoon if that worked. They agreed instantly. That should have been a red flag, but I ignored everything because I was tired of sleeping on my cousin's couch. Their house was in a quiet neighborhood, one of those places where all the houses looked like they were built in the same week. The lawns looked identical too. Even the mailboxes matched. The kind of place where nothing seems out of place. I buzzed myself in through the front gate like they told me, and the moment I stepped onto their porch, the air felt weirdly still. Not spooky or anything, just too quiet. I knocked, and the door opened almost immediately, like they had been standing right there waiting. The couple looked normal. They smiled the way people smile when they want you to feel comfortable. They invited me inside and told me to sit on the couch. I sat down, expecting maybe a quick chat about rent, rules, maybe some questions about my job or whatever. Instead, they came back holding a clipboard and a tablet, which made my stomach drop for a second. I tried to tell myself they were just organized. The interview started with basic stuff. What time I usually woke up. What kind of work I was doing. How long I planned to stay. Then it slowly shifted into questions that felt too personal to be part of renting a room. Stuff like how often I talked to my family. Whether I preferred silence or background noise. If I kept my phone on at night. How much time I spent in my room versus the common areas. whether I like to cook alone or with others. It felt less like a landlord screening and more like some study for habits. At first, I answered everything without thinking because I didn't want to seem difficult. But halfway through, I started noticing how they reacted to certain things. Whenever I mentioned liking privacy or being quiet, they looked at each other in this quick, loaded way. When I said I usually stayed up late, they wrote something down like that was important data. The whole thing felt rehearsed, like they had the questions memorized long before I walked through the door. I tried to brush off the weirdness and asked if I could see the room. They said I could, but only after they finished collecting the baseline information. That phrase stuck with me. Baseline information. Who talks like that when they're renting a room? Right then, I started feeling this pressure in the air. Not fear, but something close to embarrassment mixed with unease. Like I'd agreed to something I didn't fully understand. The couple kept checking their tablet between questions, tapping on things I couldn't see. I noticed that whenever I shifted on the couch, the wife glanced toward the corner of the room like she was checking something. I followed her eyes and spotted this tiny lens tucked into the bookshelf. It was small enough that I might have ignored it if she hadn't looked at it. I didn't want to react. My brain was screaming at me not to show anything on my face. I pretended I didn't see it, even though my pulse was suddenly loud in my ears. I started paying attention to the walls and the corners and the lamps. And that's when I noticed something even stranger. Tiny little squares, like sensor panels, placed in spots that didn't make sense for decoration. Near the ceiling, next to the TV, beside the hallway entrance. I forced myself to keep breathing normally. Then they asked a question that dropped everything into a different category of uncomfortable. They wanted to know how predictable my routine was. They asked if I usually came home at the same time every day, how often I left the house, if I ever had friends over, if I tended to stay in my room with the door closed. They asked it all like they were planning something around my schedule. Not like they were renting out a space. More like they wanted to monitor whoever lived there. I gave vague answers. I acted unsure. I said things like maybe or kinda or it depends. They didn't seem happy with that. They kept pushing for specifics, exact times, exact habits, exact patterns. At some point, I realized they weren't trying to get to know me. They were trying to figure out how easily they could observe me. When they finally said I could see the room, I followed them down the hallway. I didn't want to anymore, but refusing would make things worse. The hallway was lined with more of those little sensor squares. They showed me the room, and at first glance it looked nice. Simple bed, small desk, decent window. But then I saw the same tiny lens tucked above the closet door, another near the air vent, and a black rectangular device sitting on the dresser with a blinking light, like it was waiting for someone to activate it. The wife started listing the house expectations, but her tone had changed. She said things like every tenant contributes data to the home environment and behavioral monitoring makes the household stronger, and all movement patterns help improve shared living quality. It sounded like some weird script they practiced. None of it sounded normal. I nodded along, pretending I didn't understand half of what she meant. My hands felt jittery, but I shoved them into my pockets so they wouldn't shake. I could already tell that once someone moved into that room, the couple would know everything. When they woke up, when they left, what time they got food, whether they paced around, whether they stayed still, whether they talked on the phone, whether they breathed heavy at night. It was obvious they had some setup to track all of it, and they weren't hiding it well enough for me to miss it. They said I could move in as early as the next day if I wanted. They said they liked how I answered. That made my stomach twist. They watched me closely as I stood in the hallway after the tour, like they were waiting for a reaction or maybe a hesitation. I did everything I could to keep my face flat. I told them I had to check my schedule before I committed. They didn't seem thrilled about that, but they didn't block the door either. They walked me back to the living room, thanked me for coming, and walked me to the front porch like polite hosts. The moment the door closed behind me, I walked fast down the street, pretending to look at my phone so it seemed natural. I didn't stop until I was at least 2 blocks away. I kept imagining them watching me through some window, noting down how fast I walked, writing it into their little system of data. Once I got back to my cousin's place, I collapsed onto the couch and just stayed there replaying every strange thing in the house. Every sensor, every lens, every word they said about patterns and routines. I deleted the listing from my saved posts and blocked their number before I even took my shoes off. I've seen some weird stuff online, but that house wasn't just weird. It felt like stepping into someone else's experiment. I don't usually jump into helping family, mostly because I'm the youngest and everyone tends to act like I'll mess something up. But this whole thing started when my sister asked me to find a cheap crib for her kid. She was juggling too much already, and I figured, whatever, I could at least scroll through a few listings and maybe save her a little money. I was sitting on my bedroom floor at the time, back against the side of my bed, half eating cold noodles while reading through random posts. It felt like one of those afternoons where everything is slow, almost too slow, and you're looking for something to break the monotony. I found this listing for a used crib that actually looked pretty good. Not broken, not dirty, not one of those old ones where you can tell a kid chewed the railing. It was going for $25, which sounded unreal considering how expensive baby stuff usually is. The photos were taken in some garage, but it didn't look suspicious. Just a plain white crib with a tiny scratch on the side. The description said the seller wanted it gone quickly because they were clearing space. It all seemed fine. The seller replied fast when I messaged, like within seconds fast. He said I could pick it up that same day and told me the neighborhood. It wasn't far from where I live, maybe a 10-minute bus ride. He said he wanted to make sure it went to a good family, which didn't strike me as weird right away. People say sentimental stuff like that sometimes. I told my sister I'd handle it, grabbed my jacket, and headed out. The guy's house was small but clean, with a trimmed yard and a porch light that flickered even though it was still bright out. I could hear a dog barking somewhere in the back. I texted him I'd arrived, and the door opened almost instantly. The guy who stepped out didn't look strange or anything. He looked like someone's uncle who spent a lot of time fixing stuff in the garage. Kind of friendly but tired around the edges. He waved me inside, saying the crib was already set up so I could look at it. I followed him through this neat hallway lined with family photos, the kind you take in front of a backdrop at a mall. Everything in the house looked like it had a place. No clutter, no dust, no random stacks of things. It felt almost staged, like a show home. The crib was in a spare room. It looked exactly like the photos. I checked the bars, the mattress support, all that stuff, and everything seemed solid. I told him it worked for my sister, and he smiled like he was genuinely happy about that. Then things shifted a little. He asked how old my niece was. That didn't bother me. People ask stuff like that. I told him. Then he asked her full name. I hesitated, but I figured maybe he needed it for some weird reason, like a Facebook Marketplace receipt or something. I told him her first name and left it at that. He paused and said he actually needed her full name for the record. That phrasing felt strange. The record? What record? I joked lightly and said I didn't think cribs needed paperwork. He chuckled, but there was something off about it. Like he was amused I didn't understand something. He said the name was just in case anything came up later. That didn't make sense to me. What could possibly come up? A crib isn't a car. There's nothing to track. He asked another question before I even responded. He wanted to know what hospital she was born at. I blinked, thinking he was making conversation, but when I didn't answer fast enough, he repeated the question, this time slower. I felt this weird pull in my chest, like my instincts were finally waking up. I said I didn't remember, which was true, and he tilted his head like he didn't believe me. He kept going. He asked where my sister lived, what the house looked like, what hours she was usually home. All asked casually, but not casual enough. More like he was fishing for something. He even asked if she lived alone or if the baby's dad stayed over. He stared at me while he waited for each answer, not blinking much, like he was checking if I'd slip up. I tried to play everything off like I didn't know much, because suddenly I didn't want him knowing anything. I could feel the air in the room change, like it got heavier in this slow, creeping way. I wanted to wrap the deal up and get out. I told him I had the $25 and started pulling it out, thinking the exchange would distract him. Instead, he asked if I could write down my niece's full name on a piece of paper just for accuracy. I said again that I didn't think it was necessary. He stepped a little closer, not threatening, but enough that I noticed the shift. He said something about wanting the crib to go to the right household and how details mattered. I backed up a bit and said my sister could text him later if she wanted to share anything. That seemed to annoy him, even though he kept smiling. His shoulders tightened, and his hand twitched like he was about to gesture at something, but then he didn't. He finally said he'd take the $25 and then I could leave with a crib, but he asked one more question as I was disassembling it. He wondered if my niece had a middle name. He said it kind of lightly, but not really lightly. I lied and said she didn't. He nodded too quickly, like he clocked that I was lying. Once the crib pieces were in my arms, I headed for the front door, trying to keep my pace normal. He walked behind me, close but not touching. The house felt smaller on the way back out, like the hallway was tighter than before. Right as I reached the door, he said something that froze me for a second. He said it would be helpful if I sent a picture of the crib set up in my sister's place. He said it softly, like it was a gentle request, but my whole body went cold. I said maybe, threw out this weak smile, and stepped outside before he could say anything else. I didn't look back as I walked down the driveway, but I could feel him standing in the doorway, just standing there, watching. I kept walking until I turned the corner. Only then did I stop and catch my breath. On the ride back home, I felt this slow realization settling in me. He didn't want the money. He didn't care about the crib. He cared about information. Specific, detailed, personal information about a child he'd never met. And I still don't know why. When I got to my sister's place, she asked if anything weird happened, and I almost said no. I didn't want to stress her out. But then I pictured that guy asking for her kid's full name, hospital, address, routine. I told her to keep her door locked more than usual and not answer unknown numbers for a while. I didn't go into detail because she didn't need the panic, but I made sure she knew enough. We set up the crib together, and even though it looked perfectly normal, I couldn't stop thinking about the seller's questions. All those tiny details he tried to dig out. Details he had no reason to want. I haven't gone back to that part of town since, and every time I pass a garage sale or a listing for baby stuff, I think about the way he said he wanted the crib to go to a good family and what that phrase really meant to him. I don't know why I even bothered looking at free listings that day. Normally when something is listed as free, it's either broken, moldy, or sitting on someone's porch half ripped apart by weather. But that morning felt weird from the moment I woke up. Not bad weird, just that kind of restless boredom where you feel like if you don't do something different, the whole day is going to blend into every other day you've had lately. I was sitting on the floor in the corner of my room because that's where my charger actually works, scrolling through random posts while my phone warmed up against my leg. I wasn't even looking for anything specific. I just kept tapping deeper into categories until I hit the free stuff section. Most of the listings were useless, random boxes of mismatched cups, books with the covers falling off, old rugs that probably smelled questionable. But then I saw one posted only a few minutes earlier. A guy was giving away a bunch of kitchen items. Plates, pots, a nice-looking blender, even a small set of knives. It all looked clean, not chipped or dirty, and definitely worth more than $0. I figured someone was moving or downsizing, or just trying to clear out a cabinet. The pictures looked normal enough, and the address wasn't far from where I live. I hesitated for a second, but ended up messaging him anyway. He responded almost instantly. He said I could stop by whenever because he was home all day and wanted everything gone quickly. I told him I'd be there in 20 minutes. Honestly, the thought of getting a free blender had me weirdly excited because mine had died months ago. So I got dressed, grabbed a reusable bag, and headed out. The guy's place was on a narrow street lined with houses that all looked like they used the same blueprint, same pale siding, same small porch, same little square windows. When I walked up to his door, I could hear soft music playing inside, something old and slow. I knocked, and he opened the door so fast it made me blink. He looked friendly in a general way. Mid-30s maybe, short hair, plain shirt. Nothing creepy at all. He greeted me with this calm smile and motioned for me to come inside so I could take my pick. I stepped in, expecting clutter or boxes everywhere. But the house was clean. Organized. Almost too organized. The kitchen items were laid out on a table at a store display. All the plates were stacked perfectly. The silverware was lined up. The pots were nested like he'd spent time making them look nice for photos, even though he was giving them away. But I didn't think too hard about it. Free is free. I started picking things up one by one, testing the weight, checking for scratches. Everything looked newer than I expected. The guy stood nearby with his hands clasped behind his back, like he was supervising but trying not to look like he was supervising. He asked if I needed help carrying anything, and I said I had it under control. Then he said something that twisted the whole vibe. He asked if he could take an inventory picture. I thought he meant a picture of the items before I grabbed them. Maybe he wanted proof for someone else or a personal record of what he'd given away. But then he clarified. He said everyone who picked something up had to let him take a quick picture of them for his inventory. He said it lightly, like it was normal, like I was supposed to nod and go, okay, cool. But something about the way he said had to stuck with me. Not could. Not if I didn't mind. Had to. I tried to keep my face neutral. I asked him why, hoping maybe he had some reasonable explanation. He shrugged and said it helped him track where his items ended up. But he said that while tapping his phone against his leg, almost impatiently. The tap, tap, tap made the air feel tight. I told him I wasn't comfortable with pictures, just casually, hoping that would be enough. But he didn't back off. He stepped a little closer, not threateningly, just enough that I noticed, and said it only took a second, that everyone else had already agreed. He said the last part with this weird confidence, like he was trying to pressure me without sounding like it. I held onto the blender tightly and said I didn't want my face in any picture. He paused like he was thinking about whether I was worth convincing. The silence stretched just a little too long. Then he said it didn't have to be my face. He just needed a shot of me holding the item so he could match owner to object. That sounded even stranger. At this point, the room felt smaller. I started noticing things I didn't see before. A small camera sitting on the counter pointed toward the table. A second one on the opposite side near the fridge. A square sensor stuck next to the pantry door. His phone screen lighting up every few seconds like he had notifications coming in nonstop. My chest tightened a little. Something wasn't right. I put the blender back down and said I actually didn't think I needed anything after all. I forced a smile and said I didn't want to take stuff someone else might need more. He didn't smile back. His expression barely moved. He said I could still take something, but he repeated the part about the picture in a tone that wasn't friendly anymore. Not angry, just firm, like he was used to getting what he wanted. I told him I really had to go and stepped backward toward the door, half expecting him to block my way. He didn't move at first, and for 1 second I thought he wouldn't let me leave. But then he stepped aside and said, in his weird flat voice, that I should come back if I changed my mind, that he'd keep everything documented and ready. Confirmed. Documented. Ready. Those words stuck in my head as I stepped outside. I walked down the street without looking back, even though I could feel the weight of someone watching me from the doorway or maybe just inside the house. The sun felt harsher than before, and my mouth felt dry. I kept replaying the way he tried to get a picture of me, the way the kitchen looked staged, the cameras pointing at the table. I couldn't shake the idea that he wasn't giving things away. He was collecting something else. When I got back home, I sat on my bed and tried to calm down. It felt stupid at first, like I was overreacting about a guy wanting inventory pictures. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces didn't fit. Why would he need pictures of every person who took something free from him? Why record who took which pot or which plate? Why care at all once the stuff was gone? Unless the stuff wasn't the point. I considered reporting the listing, but I wasn't even sure what I'd say. Guy wanted a picture of me holding a blender. It didn't sound threatening enough for someone to take seriously. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the kitchen items were bait. That the photos were part of something bigger, something he didn't bother explaining because he assumed no one would question it. 2 days later, I checked the listing again out of curiosity. It was gone. Not flagged. Not expired. Just gone. Like it never existed. I checked the site for new listings from the same area, and sure enough, the guy posted a fresh one. Free electronics. Must pick up in person. The items were laid out on a table just like before. Different stuff, same setup. I didn't click on it. I shut my laptop and walked away from the desk, deciding that if anything is listed as too good and requires a picture of you holding it, it's better to leave empty-handed. I don't usually sell stuff online because I'm terrible at dealing with messages from strangers, but my room was getting crowded and my old bike was taking up way too much space against the wall. It wasn't even a great bike. The brakes squeaked, the seat had a rip down the side, and one of the pedals wobbled a little if you pushed down hard. But whenever I looked at it leaning there, all I saw was money I could use for other things. So I snapped a few pictures, threw up a quick listing, and set it for $45. I figured someone would talk me down to $30, and that would still be fine. The replies came in slower than I expected. A couple of people asked pointless questions like if the bike came with accessories or if I could deliver it even though I don't own a car. But then this one guy messaged saying he loved the style of the bike and wanted to check it out immediately. He didn't haggle or ask anything weird. He just said he was nearby and could come over in 20 minutes if that worked. I remember thinking how convenient that was. I told him it was fine, that I scrambled to pull the bike out of my room without smashing into my dresser. I wiped off some dust, pumped the tires a bit, and brought it downstairs to the entryway. While I waited, I kept refreshing the messages just in case he backed out, but he didn't. He arrived exactly when he said he would. He walked up to my building with his casual confidence, like he'd been there before. He looked normal enough, late 20s maybe, plain jacket, jeans, no weird vibes from the outside. He greeted me with this polite nod when I opened the door, not overly friendly but not cold either. Just a normal guy coming to buy a bike. He inspected it slowly, like he genuinely knew what he was doing. He spun the wheels, checked the brakes, tested the seat, all that stuff. I stood to the side, trying not to hover, but he kept glancing at me as if he was waiting for me to explain something. Then he asked if he could take it for a quick ride around the block. That was a usual request, so I said sure, but told him not to go too far because I didn't want him disappearing with it. He nodded and said he'd be fast. Watching him ride off felt slightly tense, but I figured that was just me being paranoid. He returned a minute later, braking right in front of me like he'd done it 100 times. He said it rode fine, but wanted to see proof that it was actually mine. That caught me off guard because who lies about owning a rusty bike? But I told him yeah, that was mine, and I'd had it for a while. Then he asked if he could come upstairs to see where I kept it. He said it calmly, like it was the most reasonable request in the world. He mentioned something about verifying storage conditions, but it didn't even make sense. A bike isn't some fragile collectible. It's a bike. But he said it with this tone that made me feel like refusing would make me look suspicious. I told him that wasn't necessary and that the hallway was enough proof, but he said he needed to make sure everything matched up. I don't even know what that meant. He didn't smile. He just stared in this steady way, like he was waiting for me to break first. I ended up saying the stairs were a mess because of construction, which was a lie, but at least it was something. He didn't react much. Instead, he asked where exactly I stored the bike in my place, and without thinking I motioned upward like toward my floor, just a tiny gesture but enough for him to follow my eyes. I regretted it instantly. His gaze tracked the direction I'd looked, like he was noting it down mentally. He stepped a bit closer to me, not threatening, just enough to shrink my personal space, and asked how long I'd lived here. He asked it casually, maybe even politely, but the question didn't fit with anything else we were talking about. I told him just a little while. He asked if I lived alone. I acted like I didn't hear him and pretended to check the bike tires again. Then he asked if he could see the hallway camera footage of me bringing the bike in and out. He said it like he thought every building just had that available on demand. It wasn't even a real request. It sounded more like he was testing how I'd respond. My stomach felt tight then, not because he was yelling or acting aggressive, but because everything he said was framed like a normal question, even though it wasn't normal at all. I told him that the building didn't have cameras, which was partly true. He nodded slowly, like he was weighing the answer. Then he asked if he could step into the building for a moment to get a sense of the environment. Those exact words. Get a sense of the environment. Who even talks like that about a bike? I told him someone inside was sick and I didn't want to bring germs in. A dumb excuse, but he accepted it. Or at least he acted like he accepted it. He pulled out his wallet and said he'd buy the bike for the full $45 without bargaining, which should have been great news. But something about the way he said it made the money feel like the smallest part of the whole situation. He handed me the cash, but when I reached for it, he didn't let go right away. He looked at my hand holding the bills, then at my face, and only then released his grip. He told me he'd message me if he had questions later, not in a friendly buyer-seller way. He wanted to make sure I was available. I forced a laugh and said something like sure, whatever, then quickly stepped back to put distance between us. He thanked me one more time, then rolled the bike away down the sidewalk. I stood at my building door, watching him go. He didn't ride it immediately. He just walked it for a while, glancing over his shoulder twice, like he was making sure I was still there. Only when he turned the corner did he finally ride it. I went back upstairs, but the whole time I kept imagining him turning around and coming back to knock again. My heart kept racing even after I shut the door. I sat on my bed, replaying the whole interaction in my head, trying to figure out what he really wanted. A bike buyer doesn't need to know where you live. A bike buyer doesn't need to see your hallway or check your living conditions or ask if you're alone. For the next few days, every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, I froze. Every knock on a neighbor's door made me pause whatever I was doing. I even double-checked the window to make sure the bike wasn't secretly returned, and leaning outside like some message. 3 days later, I got a message from him. He said the bike was working fine, but wanted to confirm again which floor I lived on, just for alignment. That's what he wrote. For alignment. I didn't respond. He messaged again the next day asking if the stairs in my building were narrow or wide. I didn't respond to that either. After the third message, something about how he hoped I was keeping things consistent. I blocked him. I didn't care if he got mad. I didn't care if he tried to return the bike or show up. I just didn't want to hear from him again. I haven't sold anything online since that day. The idea of a stranger coming to my door feels too strange now. I don't know what that guy wanted or what he was looking for, but I can tell he wasn't just trying to buy a used bike. I wasn't even planning on buying an office chair that day. I wasn't planning on buying anything at all. I just got stuck waiting for my friend outside this boring appointment place, and I was scrolling through my phone to kill time. The sun was blasting straight into my eyes. The sidewalk was hot enough to fry something on it, and I was just trying not to melt. I opened this listing app without thinking, the way you do when you're trying to distract your brain from how uncomfortable your body feels. I was half awake, barely paying attention, just tapping through stuff. Then I saw this listing for these used office chairs. They weren't fancy or anything, but they looked decent and way better than the one I had in my room. Mine squeaked every time I leaned back, and the cushion was basically flat. The guy selling it had posted a bunch of pictures, and the price was only $20 for one. That felt way too cheap considering how expensive chairs can be, and I figured even if it wasn't perfect, I could at least use it until it fell apart. So I messaged him and asked if they were still available. He replied fast, like super fast. He said yes and asked if I could meet him at his storage unit because that's where everything was kept since his old business closed. I didn't think twice about it because people use storage units for everything now. I told him I could get there in an hour, and he sent the address and unit number. It was across town, but still close enough that I didn't mind going. I met my friend after her appointment. We grabbed something small to eat. Then I headed out to the unit by myself. The place looked normal from the outside. Rows and rows of storage garages, each with a metal door and a padlock. When I got there, the seller was already standing in front of his unit with the door halfway open. He waved when he saw me and seemed friendly enough. Casual clothes, kind of scruffy, smiling like this whole thing was no big deal. Inside the unit, the temperature dropped instantly. It felt way colder than outside, almost like the air inside hadn't moved in forever. I could smell dust and paper, that old paper smell that reminds you of school storage rooms. The walls were lined with stacks of boxes, piled up neatly, some labeled and some blank. The chairs were off to the side, maybe 4 or 5 of them, lined up like they were waiting for a job interview. The chair I wanted looked fine, sturdy, clean enough, and honestly weighed better than what I had at home. I told him I'd take it, and he nodded and said I just had to help him grab it because things were kind of packed tight. I stepped further into the unit so I could reach it, and as soon as I did, my eyes drifted to the boxes stacked on the shelves beside me. Every box was labeled in that blocky handwriting people use when they're in a hurry. The labels weren't normal things like office supplies or paperwork. They were names, full names. Some had birth years under them. Some had numbers that looked like ID codes or something. One box said records, 2017. Another said confidential, sorting. One was labeled with 3 names in a row like a list. I didn't think anything of it at first. I figured it was old business files or something boring like that. But then he squeezed past me to reach something behind the chairs, and the movement made the front box shift just enough that the top popped open a crack. A folder slid forward inside, just enough that I could see the corner of a paper with a medical logo printed on it. I don't know what it was about that moment, but something sank in my stomach. Not panic, just this slow, heavy feeling like I'd just stumbled into something I shouldn't have seen. He noticed the box had shifted and quickly pushed it back into place. He wasn't angry or anything, but his hand stayed on the top of the box a little too long, like he was making sure it stayed shut. He handed me the chair and asked me to check the wheels, like he wanted to redirect my attention. I pretended I didn't see anything weird and rolled it back and forth. The wheels were fine. Everything about the chair was fine, but I couldn't stop thinking about those folders. He asked if I needed help carrying it to my bus stop, but I said no immediately. Too fast. He gave me a strange look, Not suspicious, just curious, like he was trying to figure out what made me so quick to refuse. I said I didn't want to trouble him. He nodded slowly. I paid him the $20 and he slid the bills into his pocket with this calm, practiced motion. Everything about him felt normal on the surface, but something underneath felt off. Not dangerous, just secretive. Like he wasn't worried about me seeing the boxes, but also didn't want me asking anything about them. Before I left, he said something like if I ever needed other office items, he had plenty more in the unit. He said it with this casual tone, but his eyes flicked toward the shelves as he spoke. I told him I'd keep that in mind, even though I knew I wouldn't come back. I wheeled the chair out of the unit, trying not to look behind me. Once I got outside, the sun felt too bright again, and the whole world felt loud. Cars passing, wind moving the grass, people talking across the lot. Everything felt more real than the air inside that storage unit. I didn't look back until I reached the sidewalk. The seller was still standing in the unit doorway, holding the metal door with one hand, watching me walk away before finally pulling it down. That night, when I got home, I set up the chair in my room. It worked perfectly. No squeaks, no wobbling, no ripped cushion. But I couldn't shake the image of those names written on the boxes. Some of them had ages next to them. Some had dates. And I kept thinking about that folder with the medical logo. Why would someone keep stuff like that in a random storage unit? Why not shred it? Why not store it in a locked office? I tried telling myself it was none of my business, that maybe he used to own a clinic or something and never got around to clearing the files. But the more I pictured the shelves, the more wrong it felt. There were way too many boxes, and they were organized, not thrown into storage randomly, but stacked carefully like he checked them often. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I rolled over, I thought about the unit, the cold air, the labels, the way he pushed the box shut. I kept imagining other folders inside, stacked tight, full of people's private information. I even thought about telling someone, but I didn't know who. I didn't know what I'd even say. I bought a chair and saw some names. It didn't sound like something anyone would take seriously. A few days later, curiosity got the best of me. I looked at the name that stood out on the front box, the one I had seen clearly. Not to stalk or anything, just to see if it was some kind of business reference. But when I searched it, the only result that came up was an obituary from a few years ago. The birth year matched the one written on the box. I clicked out of the browser so fast my fingers slipped. I haven't checked any other names. I don't want to know. The chair still sits in my room. It works fine. But every time I sit in it, part of me feels like I dragged home a piece of that storage unit. Not an object, just the feeling of it. The quiet cold. The boxes stacked higher than my head. The labels written in thick marker. All the things I wasn't supposed to see. I wasn't really supposed to be walking that route that day. My usual path from the bus stop to my apartment is straight, uneventful, predictable. But I took a detour, mostly because I was in a hurry and figured I'd cut through a couple of side streets to save time. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where every house looked the same, and the sidewalks were cracked and uneven. I had earbuds in, blasting music low enough that I could still hear cars, and I wasn't paying attention to anything beyond the next step. That's when I saw the dog. It was a medium-sized golden retriever, wearing a collar but no tags. Its fur was dusty, matted in a few spots, and it was trotting down the street in a kind of frantic way, sniffing at everything. It looked lost. My gut told me it wasn't dangerous. Dogs in the neighborhood always seemed scared of strangers. But something about the way it moved, tail low, ears back, made me slow down. I crouched, trying to call it over softly. It came to me slowly, sniffing my shoes, tail flicking now and then, and I checked the collar. No tag. The dog looked at me like it wanted help, and I figured someone probably put up a Craigslist post about a missing dog. I took out my phone and started scrolling. Sure enough, there it was. A post with a picture that looked identical to the dog in front of me. The title said, "Lost Dog. Reward $100. The description matched too. Golden retriever, slightly matted coat, very friendly. I felt a little spark of relief. Someone was worried about this dog. I messaged the number immediately, telling them I found their dog and was willing to bring it back. The response was fast, almost too fast, and it asked me if I could meet them at their house a few blocks away. They said they'd be waiting in the driveway and gave me a brief description of the house. I stuffed my phone into my pocket, and the dog walked ahead of me as if it knew where it was going. The street was quiet, except for the occasional car passing slowly. I kept thinking about how relieved the owner must feel, imagining them opening the door and seeing their dog trotting up. But when I reached the house, my stomach twisted in a way I couldn't place. It was a big house, older style, but it looked empty. Windows were dusty, the lawn unkempt. No car in the driveway. No one on the porch. I called out softly, told the dog to wait. The dog wagged its tail and sat near the edge of the lawn, looking back at me like it was confused. I tried the phone again, texted the number. No reply. Just as I was about to turn around and head back with the dog, the door creaked open. A man stepped out, mid-30s, thin, wearing jeans and a dark jacket. He had a smile that was just a little too calm. Not friendly, not cold, just calculated. "Is that my dog?" he asked. Voice calm, measured. I nodded. He gestured toward the porch like I should hand it over there. I hesitated. The dog didn't move, standing close to me as if it was uncertain about the man. The guy stepped closer and asked if I could come inside for a second to confirm it was really his dog. I blinked. Inside. "This isn't part of returning a lost dog." I told him I'd rather just hand the dog over here. He laughed lightly, not a harsh laugh, more like a chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. He insisted, said he had to confirm because someone else might have tried to scam him. I kept my ground, told him I was happy to give the dog back, but I wasn't stepping inside. His expression changed slightly, like a mask sliding for a second. He didn't push, but his eyes flicked toward the windows behind him as if measuring escape routes. Finally, he said, "Fine, but I need your name first and I need to know your phone number." I paused. That wasn't normal. A normal person just wants their dog back, not my info. I gave him a fake first name and a burner number I had saved from old apps. He didn't react much, just nodded like it was fine. He then asked, casually, where I live. That set off alarms in my head. I said I lived nearby, but I didn't give a street. He didn't press. Instead, he asked what time I usually left for school, work, errands. I gave vague answers, hoping he wouldn't notice the lack of specifics. The dog sat obediently at my side, ears perked, like it understood tension had risen. He seemed satisfied after a few more casual-sounding questions, then reached down slowly to grab the dog. The dog froze, looking at me for a long second, then the man scooped it up. I kept my hands near it, not touching, just standing still. He didn't say thank you, didn't offer money, didn't ask any other normal questions about the dog. He just carried it inside, closing the door slowly behind him, and that's when I realized something was off. I stood there, the dog's collar brushing my leg through the screen door, and I felt that slow sinking feeling you get when a puzzle piece doesn't fit. That wasn't a lost dog. That dog had been placed there. The photos, the reward, the fast responses, all a setup to make me bring it. I didn't know why at the time. Maybe he wanted someone to meet him. Maybe he was fishing for information. Maybe he was just testing how people reacted. I didn't stay to figure it out. I left the neighborhood, walking faster than I had before. My phone buzzed, but I didn't look at it. When I got home, I locked the door twice, then sat on my bed staring at my own four walls. The music I had been listening to on the bus earlier was still playing in my head. Something that seemed normal, a simple act of returning a lost dog, had turned into a quiet, heavy kind of fear that didn't have a clear shape. For the next week, I avoided that street. Every time I passed a neighborhood that looked similar, I felt a little sick in my stomach. I wondered how many other lost dog posts were like that, and how many strangers they had fooled before me. I didn't report it. I didn't know how. I didn't know what to say. Who would believe that a dog that wasn't lost had been used to lure strangers? Sometimes at night, when I'm lying in bed, I replay that moment over and over. The dog's calm look, the way it waited by my side, the man's controlled movements, and I realized that for all I thought I saw, I really didn't see anything. The dog went inside. I never got another message. I never saw the man again. All I have is the memory of a walk that started out normal and ended with a question mark that never got answered. I never thought helping someone move could feel like walking into a trap, but that's exactly how it went down. It started on one of those lazy Sunday afternoons when I had nothing to do and my phone was blowing up with notifications from local listings. I wasn't really planning to get involved with anything, just scrolling to pass the time, but then I saw a post. Help me move a few things. Cash in hand, $50. That's how these things usually start, right? Simple labor, quick money. No risk. The guy's profile didn't have much. Just a name, no pictures, nothing suspicious at first glance. He said he had to move a couple of boxes and some furniture from his old apartment to a storage unit across town. I figured why not? $50 for an hour's work was way better than sitting around. I shot him a message, and he replied almost immediately confirming he needed help in 30 minutes. When I got there, I noticed the street first. It was quiet, almost eerily quiet. Cars parked haphazardly, houses looking empty, lawns overgrown. It didn't scream active neighborhood, but that didn't cross my mind at first. I walked up to the building he mentioned, a small, older apartment complex with peeling paint and a loose mailbox that rattled in the wind. He was waiting outside, looking casual but alert. He smiled when he saw me, held out his hand, and I introduced myself. The first thing I noticed about him was how smooth he was, almost too smooth. He didn't just talk like a normal person. He had this way of filling the air with words that didn't really matter but made you feel like you were part of the plan. He told me the plan was simple. Carry boxes from apartment 3B to his truck, then load furniture and head to storage unit 19A. I nodded, not thinking much. Inside the apartment, the boxes were stacked neatly along one wall. Nothing heavy, nothing unusual, except that all the labels were handwritten in block letters. Some said books, some said clothes, some said kitchen. Nothing strange at first glance. The furniture was also basic: lamps, a small dresser, a folding table. I started grabbing boxes and noticed the way he was watching me. Not closely, not like he was inspecting me, but with a steady gaze that made me aware of every move I made. I carried a few boxes downstairs and loaded them into his truck. The boxes were light, almost unnaturally light. I commented on it, joking that he must have packed feathers. He laughed, but his eyes flicked toward the apartment like he was making sure something stayed inside. I didn't think much of it. Then he asked if I could help him with the larger items, like the dresser and the lamps. He said it was awkward and heavy, and he needed a second pair of hands. I agreed. But as we started moving things, I noticed something strange. The way he maneuvered around the furniture made the space feel smaller than it was. Every time I glanced at the walls or corners, there were small cameras mounted, almost invisible unless you looked closely. I froze for a second, realizing they weren't pointed at the door or the street. They were pointed at the boxes and the space we were moving through. I tried to ignore it. Maybe he just liked documenting the move for some reason. Maybe it was paranoia. I told myself it wasn't my business, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me as we carried the larger items out. Once everything was in the truck, he suggested we drive to the storage unit right away. The trip was short, just a few blocks, but the entire time I noticed how he didn't make small talk. He just drove with a calm precision, checking mirrors and glancing at me occasionally without smiling. When we arrived, the storage complex was empty, nothing like the busier units in other parts of town. He led me to Unit 19A and started unloading boxes. Here's where things got really weird. He didn't just put boxes in the unit. He arranged them. Not stacked, not neat, but deliberately placed so the labels faced him and he could access each one quickly. Then he pulled out a clipboard and started checking something off a list. The list had names. Full names, dates, addresses. I didn't recognize any of them, but the way he moved through the boxes like a catalog, checking names against the list, made my stomach twist. I tried to stay busy, helping him unload, but every so often my eyes caught glimpses of the labels. They weren't normal boxes of personal items. Some had medical references, some had personal documents, some had photographs taped to the side, and every time I looked up he was watching me. Not like he was suspicious, but like he was aware that I was starting to notice things. When we finally finished, he handed me the $50. I took the bills, but my hands shook slightly. Something about the calm way he handed them over, the neatness of the operation, and the way the boxes were arranged made my skin crawl. I smiled and said thanks, trying to sound casual, but it felt hollow. He started locking up the storage unit, and that's when he said something that really got me. You know, most people just take the money and leave. It's rare someone actually helps the way you did. I'll remember that. His voice was calm, almost approving, but there was an edge to it, like he was sizing me up. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and walked toward my car. He watched me go. The whole way back home, I kept imagining the labels, the cameras, the way he organized everything. What was in those boxes? Why did he need a second person to help move them if nothing about them looked dangerous? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I hadn't just helped him move furniture. I had walked into a system, carefully orchestrated, where every move I made had been noticed and cataloged. A few days later, I saw another listing. It was almost identical, same wording, same casual tone, but for different apartment, different boxes. And I realized that the first move wasn't unique. This guy, or someone like him, had been running the same kind of operation, moving boxes, checking names, documenting who helped, probably cataloging everything for reasons I didn't want to think about. I never responded to any more help me move listings. I deleted my account, blocked any messages from unknown numbers, and started taking longer routes to school just to avoid streets that looked like those blocks. I never saw him again, never knew what happened to those boxes, and probably never will. But every time I see someone posting a casual help me move ad online, I feel my stomach twist, remembering the quiet precision of the operation, the calm way he ran everything, and how easy it was for me to be a part of it without even realizing. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary when I saw the post. I had just moved into a new apartment and my budget was tight, so scrolling through local listings for free stuff had become a habit. People always give away couches, chairs, old desks, junk that's too heavy to sell but too valuable to toss. The post caught my eye because it was simple. Free furniture. Must pick up. No pictures, no extra details, just that. Free sounded perfect. I thought, great, maybe I can grab a chair or a small table and finally stop sitting on the floor. I messaged the number immediately and got a reply within minutes. The person said they'd be home in about an hour and gave me the address. The street sounded familiar, but not really. I'd passed it a few times on the bus, but never walked down it. I figured no big deal, just another errand. I didn't think twice. When I arrived, the neighborhood was quieter than I expected. Sidewalks cracked, lawns unkempt, houses close together. I walked up to the house, a two-story thing with peeling paint, and a swing set in the yard that looked like it hadn't been used in years. There was no car in the driveway, just an open garage with a few large items stacked inside. A man came out when he saw me. Mid-30s, average height, wearing a hoodie and jeans. Nothing unusual, friendly enough. He greeted me and told me to come inside to pick up the items. That should have been my first red flag, but I didn't think about it. Free stuff means a little effort sometimes. I walked past him into the garage, and that's when I noticed how dark it was inside. Dust everywhere, boxes stacked against the walls, furniture piled high. There were a few lamps, a table, a chair, all covered with sheets, like someone had moved them recently and didn't bother to put them away. He started pointing to the different pieces, naming each one, and I stepped closer to inspect a chair. That's when I saw the first folder sticking out from a box, a manila envelope with handwriting on it. I read it quickly. It wasn't anything I should have seen. Names, dates, small notes. I froze. He noticed me glance at it but didn't say anything, just waited for me to pick something up. I told myself it was nothing, just old personal stuff he was throwing away. I tried to focus on the furniture, but the feeling of being watched was heavy. He kept glancing at me every few seconds, not looking threatening, just present. The kind of presence that makes you aware of your every move. I grabbed the lamp to put in my car, and as I carried it past the boxes, one of them shifted slightly. Another envelope peeked out. More names, more dates, some even had addresses. I asked casually, "Do you need help carrying these?" Expecting him to say no or yes like normal. He smiled, kind of tightly, and said, "Sure, if you don't mind." I didn't want to refuse. I didn't want to seem rude, but the way he handed me the box, heavier than it looked, made me realize he wanted me to go deeper into the garage. Once I had carried a few boxes toward my car, I noticed how quiet it was outside. Not just quiet, but empty, like no one else was around for miles. The street I had just walked down didn't have anyone, and the houses that were near were all dark inside. That made the garage feel tighter, smaller, like the walls were closing in. He started talking about the furniture, asking which pieces I wanted. I picked a chair and a lamp, thinking that was enough. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "You don't mind taking a couple more boxes, do you? They're mostly light." His voice was calm, casual. But the emphasis on light made me suspicious. I said no at first, but he kept smiling and asked if I really wanted to leave all this behind for free. I agreed, not thinking about what was inside. I shouldn't have. The boxes were lighter than they should have been, and when I carried one, it felt like it had been packed carefully. Nothing loose, nothing falling apart. I started noticing that the envelopes inside all had people's names again, and some of the folders had social security numbers, old bills, tiny notes about addresses. I froze, trying to figure out if I should confront him. He didn't say anything, just handed me another box, smiling that tight smile. After a few trips, I had everything loaded into my car. The man walked me to the door, gave me a casual nod, and said, "Thanks for helping. I appreciate it." That should have been the end. Free furniture done. But when I got into my car, I noticed something I had ignored until then: the way the boxes were arranged in the garage. They weren't just stacked. They were organized by date, by name, like someone cataloged everything meticulously. Not garbage. Information. Carefully packed information, being handed to a stranger. I drove home, heart racing, hands tight on the steering wheel. The free furniture now felt like a weight, not because it was heavy, but because of what I had just carried. Names, addresses, personal details, thrown into my car with lamps and a chair. The casual way he gave me those boxes felt like a test, like he wanted to see if I would notice. Once home, I unloaded everything quickly, trying not to look inside. I hid the folders at the bottom of a closet, covered by old blankets. I couldn't throw them away. I couldn't bring them back. I couldn't touch them again without thinking about what he might have been doing. The furniture was fine. Lamps worked. The chair sat where it belonged. But the folders, the organized envelopes, and the way he had handed them to me without a word, something about it stuck. For days afterward, I kept imagining that garage, that smile, and the casual way he had asked me to carry the boxes. Every time I saw a free furniture post online, my stomach tightened. I started questioning how many others were like him, using free stuff to make strangers handle things they had no business seeing. I never messaged anyone from those posts again. I never went back to that street, and every time I sit in that chair or turn on that lamp, I remember the tight smile and the wave of information I had carried without realizing it. I thought I was just getting a roommate. That's all I was looking for. Someone to split rent with, someone normal, someone who wouldn't make things complicated. I posted an ad on Craigslist, simple stuff. 2-bedroom apartment, rent split evenly, no drama. I wasn't expecting much. People usually reply, you meet a few, and then it's done. But this guy responded within an hour, and something about his message made me feel like he was too eager. He said he was responsible, had a steady job, liked quiet nights, and would be happy to move in immediately. I met him the next day at the apartment. He seemed fine. Average build, mid-20s, wore a hoodie and jeans like everyone does. Polite handshake, no weird questions, didn't smell or anything. I showed him the place, explained the rent, bills, everything. He agreed, said he could pay the first month right away. I thought, great, problem solved. He said he'd move in that afternoon. I didn't think anything strange at first. He moved in, and everything seemed normal for the first few days. He kept to his side of the apartment, paid rent, did the dishes occasionally, never asked too many questions. I thought, okay, maybe this worked out better than I expected. I was careful not to get too friendly, didn't want someone getting too comfortable in my space. But then subtle things started happening. At first, it was small. I'd put food in the fridge, and it would disappear faster than I expected. He claimed he didn't eat that, but I wasn't sure. He started leaving his clothes around my side of the room sometimes, like he was marking territory without me noticing. I chalked it up to absent-mindedness, but the feeling in my gut kept growing. Then came the mail. Bills, letters, packages. It started showing up addressed to both of us, but he'd open mine and leave the contents on his desk. I didn't want to make a scene, but it felt invasive. I told him once casually to leave my mail alone. He laughed, said he thought it was all shared. That was the first time I noticed the way his eyes lingered, the way he smiled just slightly too long. Weeks went by. He never complained about anything, never suggested leaving, never acted like he had somewhere else to go. I mentioned needing the extra room for guests once, and he said it was fine, no problem. But the way he said it, like he wasn't even considering that he might need to move, started creeping me out. I tried to ignore it, to live normally. I had friends over, I went out, I did my routine. But at night, I hear his movements, walking in his room, opening drawers, not sneaky, just there, present. I started locking my door, but he never seemed to notice, or maybe he didn't care. One day, I came home to find that my side of the kitchen was rearranged. My dishes were stacked differently, my pantry items shifted. I confronted him, asked if he had touched my things. He said no, didn't even sound worried. But his tone, calm as it was, made my stomach knot. It was like he was testing boundaries, seeing how much he could do without me noticing. I started noticing other things. Personal items disappearing briefly and showing up in strange places. He'd borrow my headphones, my books, even my clothes occasionally, always returning them with a casual shrug, like it was nothing. I began sleeping with the bedroom door locked, double-checking my locks, keeping my valuables in the closet. I didn't feel safe. Not violently threatened, but encroached upon. Months passed. I tried talking to him about moving out gently, mentioning plans I had, reasons I needed the space. He always said he understood, that he would look for a place soon. But he never did. I didn't push too hard because confrontation scared me a little. I didn't know how he'd react. But the feeling never left. He was slipping into my life without moving, occupying more than just the apartment physically. I tried subtle things. Changing routines, coming home at different times, hiding food, locking the kitchen. Nothing stopped him. He always adapted, always there, like he had been part of the apartment from the beginning. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't open hostility. It was this quiet, insidious presence that made every corner of my home feel like it wasn't mine anymore. I confided in a friend once, tried to laugh it off, say he was harmless, just weird. But when I described the patterns, the way he moved through my space, the way he never left, even when I said he should, my friend went pale. That's not normal, they said. That's someone taking over. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew they were right. I tried talking to him again. I was direct this time. I needed the apartment back. I needed him out. He nodded, smiled, said he understood, and then went into his room like it was no big deal. Nothing changed. Weeks went by. Rent day came, he paid, kept his side of the bills, kept smiling. My frustration grew. My sense of safety in the apartment dwindled. I started sleeping elsewhere when I could, staying at friends' places. I avoided using the living room. My own space, my own apartment, felt like a shared zone I had no control over. Every time I opened the door, I felt I was walking into someone else's domain. I had given consent once, and he had turned it into something permanent. The breaking point came when I read a package meant for me in the trash outside his room. He claimed it was trash, but it had my name on it. That's when I realized I had to act. I couldn't exist anymore. But even then, I was careful. He wasn't violent, wasn't loud, wasn't threatening. He was just there. Everywhere. Quietly persistent. The type of person who can turn a shared space into a trap without ever raising suspicion. I finally moved out myself. Packed quickly, left early in the morning, never looked back. I didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't get closure. Just a quiet apartment, a pile of boxes, and a sense of relief mixed with lingering unease. The lease was still active, and he stayed behind, paying rent, smiling, living in the space that had once been mine. Even now, when I think about it, not like I'm scared, but like a cautionary story that doesn't have a neat ending. I wasn't taken physically, nothing violent happened. But my privacy, my sense of control, my ability to feel safe in my own apartment, all of that was quietly eroded. And the craziest part, he wasn't breaking any laws. He was just there, a permanent presence that slowly made me disappear from my own space.